Breadcrumbing is one of those modern relationship behaviors that feels small on the surface but leaves a surprisingly deep emotional impact. It's subtle, confusing, and often hard to call out because nothing obviously bad is happening. There are messages, check-ins, likes, reactions, and occasional compliments, just enough attention to keep someone emotionally invested, but never enough to build a real connection. To understand breadcrumbing, you have to look beyond the behavior itself and into the psychology driving both the person who breadcrumbs and the person who stays hooked. At its core, breadcrumbing is about control without commitment. The person doing it isn't fully present, but they also aren't fully gone. They drop breadcrumbs of attention to maintain access to you, your validation, your availability, your emotional energy, without taking responsibility for your needs. This creates a one-sided dynamic where hope is kept alive, but fulfillment is always postponed. One of the strongest psychological forces behind breadcrumbing is the human need for validation. For many people, attention equals worth. When someone responds quickly, shows interest, or seems emotionally available, it reinforces the breadcrumber's sense of desirability. They don't necessarily want a relationship with you, they want the feeling that comes from being wanted. Each reply, each time you engage, acts like a small hit of reassurance. Over time, this can become a habit, even an addiction. The breadcrumber learns that minimal effort still produces emotional rewards. Another key factor is avoidance. Breadcrumbing is common among people who fear intimacy but also fear abandonment. They don't want to be alone, yet they don't want to be fully known. Real relationships require vulnerability, consistency, and accountability, all things that feel threatening to someone with avoidant tendencies. Breadcrumbing allows them to stay at a safe emotional distance while still keeping someone close enough to soothe their loneliness. It's a psychological compromise, closeness without exposure. Power dynamics also play a major role. Breadcrumbing creates an imbalance where one person is always waiting, hoping, and interpreting signals, while the other controls the pace and depth of interaction. This power can be intoxicating, even unconsciously. Knowing someone is emotionally invested gives the breadcrumber leverage. They decide when to show up and when to disappear. This intermittent presence makes their attention feel more valuable, even though it's inconsistent. The less predictable the reward, the more compelling it becomes. From a behavioral psychology perspective, breadcrumbing is fueled by intermittent reinforcement. This is the same principle that makes gambling addictive. When rewards are unpredictable, the brain releases more dopamine than when rewards are consistent. You never know when the next message will come, so you stay alert, checking your phone, replaying conversations, searching for meaning. Each small sign of attention feels disproportionately exciting because it's rare and uncertain. Over time, your emotional system becomes trained to crave these crumbs, even though they never satisfy you. This is why breadcrumbing is so emotionally exhausting. The person on the receiving end often feels anxious, self-doubting, and stuck. They may constantly ask themselves what they did wrong, what they should say next, or how to become more interesting, so the other person will finally commit. This self-blame is not accidental. Breadcrumbing thrives on ambiguity. Because nothing is clearly defined, the responsibility for clarity gets shifted onto the person who wants more. The breadcrumber can always say, "I never promised anything." Hope is another powerful, psychological hook. Humans are wired to focus on potential, especially in relationships. When someone shows just enough interest, the mind fills in the gaps with imagined futures. You don't respond to who they are, you respond to who you believe they could be. Breadcrumbing keeps that imagined version alive. Every, "Hey, how are you?" feels like proof that maybe this time will be different. Letting go then feels like giving up on something that hasn't fully had a chance, even if it's been draining you for months. Attachment styles deeply influence how breadcrumbing plays out. People with anxious attachment are especially vulnerable. They tend to seek reassurance and are highly sensitive to changes in availability. Breadcrumbing triggers their deepest fears of abandonment while simultaneously offering relief through occasional attention. This creates an emotional roller coaster. Anxiety during silence, relief during contact, and confusion in between. The cycle can become so intense that the anxious person feels emotionally dependent on the breadcrumber, even when they're unhappy. On the other side, breadcrumbers often display avoidant or disorganized attachment patterns. They may value independence, struggle with emotional expression, or associate closeness with loss of control. Breadcrumbing lets them maintain autonomy while avoiding the discomfort of total detachment. In some cases, they may not even be fully aware of the harm they're causing. They tell themselves they're being nice, checking in, or keeping things casual, without acknowledging the emotional consequences for the other person. Social media has amplified breadcrumbing significantly. Likes, story views, emojis, and short reactions allow people to maintain a presence in someone's life without real engagement. A single heart on a photo can reignite weeks of hope. This low-effort contact makes breadcrumbing easier and more socially acceptable. It also blurs boundaries, making it harder to tell whether someone is genuinely interested or just bored, lonely, or seeking attention in the moment. Breadcrumbing can also be a way of keeping options open. In a culture that encourages endless choice, some people struggle to commit because they fear missing out on something better. By breadcrumbing multiple people, they create emotional backups. If one option doesn't work out, there's always someone else still emotionally available. This mindset turns relationships into safety nets rather than connections, reducing people to sources of comfort instead of partners with needs. For the person being breadcrumbed, the psychological toll can be heavy. Over time, self-esteem often erodes. When you consistently receive partial attention, you may start to believe that full attention is too much to ask for. You normalize inconsistency. You lower your expectations. You may even mistake anxiety for passion, believing that the emotional intensity means the connection is special. In reality, the intensity comes from uncertainty, not love. One of the most damaging effects of breadcrumbing is how it distorts your sense of reality. You begin to overanalyze everything. A delayed reply feels personal. A short message feels like rejection. A sudden burst of attention feels like hope. Your emotional state becomes dependent on someone else's behavior. This hyper-focus pulls you away from your own life, goals, and emotional balance. You're present physically, but mentally you're always waiting. Breadcrumbing often ends not with closure, but with fading. The messages get slower. The response is shorter. Eventually, contact stops, or continues at such a minimal level that it feels impossible to confront. This lack of resolution can make it harder to move on. Without a clear ending, the brain keeps the door open. You may find yourself wondering months later why you're still thinking about someone who never really showed up. Understanding the psychology behind breadcrumbing is not about blaming yourself or diagnosing others. It's about recognizing patterns. When someone's words and actions don't align, when connection never progresses, when you feel more anxious than secure, those are signals worth listening to. Healthy relationships don't rely on confusion to survive. They don't keep you guessing about where you stand. Breaking free from breadcrumbing starts with clarity. Not clarity from the other person, but from yourself. Knowing what you want, what you deserve, and what you're no longer willing to tolerate changes the dynamic immediately. Breadcrumbing only works when someone is willing to accept crumbs instead of asking for a seat at the table. Ultimately, breadcrumbing reflects a deeper discomfort with emotional responsibility. It's easier to keep someone half attached than to either fully commit or fully let go. But for the person on the receiving end, choosing to step away is not a loss, it's a return to self-respect. When you stop chasing crumbs, you make room for connections that are consistent, mutual, and real.